common mistake startup founders make is not thinking about the exit sooner. What I mean by that is it's easy to think about the vision, customers, business model, the day-to-day, and not think about what are you going to actually do once the company's successful? Are you planning on IPOing? Are you going to get acquired? Who are you going to get acquired by? And this exit is really, really important, especially if you're a venture-backed startup, because most venture-backed companies that have an exit tend to exit through an acquisition. And unfortunately, startup founders tend not to think about that early enough. And that's why Mart Achler and Mert Iseri wrote a book called Exit Right. They are both veterans in the startup and venture capital space, working at Math Ventures. Mark was an early employee at Apple, as well as head of innovation at Redbox, and has been investing in startups for almost 40 years, 35 plus years now. So he really knows what he's talking about. He's seen a large number of exits, and Mert just recently exited a company and shares his learnings and what they did early on in the process, how he built relationships that ultimately made it easier to have that acquisition when it was time. And it's a really interesting conversation that we have. This book is fantastic. Just based on the nuggets that you're going to get here, I know you're going to want to go and pick it up. So without further ado, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Silicon Alley Podcast featuring the Mart Achler and Mert Iseri. Are you interested in growing and scaling your business? Welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast, where you'll hear from entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and top performers on what it truly takes to grow and scale a business. You'll walk away with actionable insights you can apply in your own business and life. Now to William Glass, the CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and your host of the Silicon Alley Podcast. Mert, Mark, welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast. Super excited to have you guys on today.
Oh, Will, I've been looking forward to this. We're really thrilled to have the conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive in too, because exits are a really important part of every entrepreneur's journey, right? Whether you however you exit, whether it crashes and burns, whether you sell for a lot of money, you don't sell for a lot of money, you IPO, or eventually you just, you exit life, right? And the business continues on. So I'm really excited to dive into this because it's not a topic that we've really gotten into yet on the podcast. But before we jump into the meat of the conversation today, I'd love to get a little background. You both are involved in the venture capital world, the startup world. Could you just quickly give some context as to who you guys are and why you wrote this book together?
Sure, I'll start. So my name is Mart Achler, and I have been a serial entrepreneur. I started off life at Apple Computer in the very early days, and then after Apple, I started a series of companies. Some worked, some didn't work, part of the entrepreneurial journey, and eventually started my own venture capital fund after a successful exit. This is back in the .com days. And then did some more entrepreneurial work and ended up being part of the executive team at Redbox to help. I was the head of innovation and the interim head of marketing for Redbox. And then currently I started a venture capital fund with my partner, Troy Henikoff, and we brought in another partner, Dana Wright, and we invest in early stage technology companies. And the fund is called Math Venture Partners. And that's me.
Awesome.
And my name is Mart Iseri. I was born and raised in Istanbul, Turkey. Came to study engineering here in the US, ended up sticking around, met two of my lovely co-founders here in college. All of us were engineers. We started a healthcare technology company called SwipeSense. Now it feels like forever ago in 2012. We work with hospitals to reduce their infection rates and avoid preventable errors. Ended up raising $24 million, got acquired by S.C. Johnson. And after spending about a year and a half there, I left and co-authored this book, Exit Right, with Mart Achler. Mark has been a longtime mentor of mine. I pitched Math Venture Partners actually 3 times in my own entrepreneurial journey as an operator. And the answer was always a very kind but firm, not now. And I took that to heart. When I hear not now, I mean, okay, great. See you next time. And I just kept up a relationship. And, really, Mark became one of those folks that I really trust. And Mark doesn't give himself credit in here, sort of like a Yoda type figure in the Chicago entrepreneurial scene here. He's really a servant of the ecosystem. of the companies that he's an investor in, obviously he helps out a deal, but even the ones that he doesn't end up investing in, always spends time and gives and sort of like allows you to share ideas and grow your company. He's someone that I've learned a great deal from, and we sat down to sort of like work on this like book project together. The end result is what we're going to discuss today, but really along the way we became really, really close. So today, actually, I'm part of Matt Venture Partners as an entrepreneur in residence. So the story in a way came full circle, and now we have the privilege of working together, and it feels like don't let Mark hear this twice, but it doesn't feel like, how is this a real job? I mean, I'm having the best day every day. So it really feels amazing to work together every day.
Oh, thanks, Mert. And you know, that was, that's actually how the book came to be, which is, even though Math did not invest in Mert, we became dear friends. And we were, both my partner, Troy, and I, we were, not only became business friends, but social friends with Mert and his partners and co-founders. And when it was time for SwipeSense to be sold, even though we weren't investors and we weren't on the board, we were the phone call. Like, we were the call when difficult times happen, and all transactions, every transaction has an emotional arc, and there's always good days and bad days. And there's days when the transaction's hanging by a thread, you know, and I was the phone call where, like, I'd be talking Mert off the ceiling. It's like, you know, it's like, it's okay. We'll get through this. Here's how we do it. And what happened is, once the transaction was completed, his transaction, we were having coffee. This was right in March of 2020, right before everything shut down for COVID. And kudos to Mert for actually getting a transaction closed right as the world was shutting down. And you know, Mert's kind of grumbling. I was like, rah, 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 rah. And I said to Mert, in the spirit of giving back, while it's still raw, while it's still fresh, why don't you write it down, right? Write down everything that you just went through, so that the next time SC Johnson buys a technology company, you could say, hey guys, this is what I went through. Here's how we can make it better. Here's how we can make the process better. And out poured 10 pages. And I looked at that and I went, you know, there's so many books out there for entrepreneurs about how to start a business and how to raise money and the messy middle, culture, sales, HR, whatever. But there's very little out there about how to sell a business. And we realized that there was so much wisdom out there. And I took a step back, and we took a step back, and we looked at it, and we went, you know, transactions are confidential. And so people don't like to, you know, there's confidentiality agreements. You can't talk about them. And if it's a good exit, people don't want to brag, or, you know, they don't want it out there what their personal net worth is. Or if it was a bad exit, people are embarrassed, and, you know, they're kind of full of shame, and they don't want to, you know, they don't want to put it out there. And we decided that, once again, in the spirit of giving back, it was so important to collect these stories and these best practices to help entrepreneurs. And Mert, I'm gonna turn over to you, and we'll talk about how we wrote the book. But one thing I want to comment on is the decisions an entrepreneur makes at the beginning of their journey has an outsized impact at the end of their journey. So who you give equity to, are you giving equity to co-founders? How is that structured? Is it vested? What happens if they leave? What happens if there's dead equity on the cap table? You know, advisors who really don't provide value, or who you allow to invest in your company. And I use the word allow because I know I'm very respectful. I know how hard it is for entrepreneurs to raise money. But there are good VCs and bad VCs. There's good investors and bad investors. Money's just money. And you're going to have to live with these VCs for the next 10 years plus.
Yeah.
Right. And so you share values with them. And so, like, This book is, you might think this book is all about how to sell your business at the end, but there's some really important words of wisdom in this book about the beginning of the journey as well. So Mert,
Absolutely.
I'll turn it over to you.
Well, let me jump in real quick, Mark, because I've got a couple things that I wanted to jump in on. The first was, do you regret not investing in Mert's company as you went through that? And that's a sly way to ask, how was his exit, I guess.
That's really what you read. Mert, well, I'll let Mert answer that.
Well, of course, but to me, it's not just about the investment and the number it makes in the end. Of course, it was a good exit. Our investors made a return. I would have loved to have Mark on board as an investor, but I really want to underline what Mark had shared like earlier in this conversation. Company is one company. The entrepreneurs typically are folks who want to do this many times over. We're kind of crazy in that way. I ended up joining SE Johnson in about a year and a half. I was going crazy.
Like, I want to build things. Mark himself have built 4 companies like back to back, even after ones that didn't work out, maybe especially after ones that didn't work out, because you get that fire, you get that chip on your shoulder. You want to, chips in shoulders, put chips in pockets. So I like to think that while, I regretfully didn't have Matt on board as an investor, I know that they're my first phone call if at any point in the future I decide to start another company. Now, I'm perfectly happy on the investing side right now. I never really thought of myself as one day I would be a VC. I always sort of as like I'm a member of the Jedi Order. I don't want to join the dark side. And turns out there's some Jedis in the Sith Order as well. And Math as a fund, we're all made up of operators ourselves. So this idea that we can roll up our sleeves with the founders that we invest in is a real privilege that I get to experience every day. So I don't think of this as a one-time, one-way street. This is a long journey, hopefully over many, many, many companies, where we all get to build this ecosystem together. And it doesn't have to be a short-term zero-sum game. It's a long-term win-win game.
Yeah, no, I love that. And makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah, entrepreneurs tend to go start other companies, especially if, as you said, either they're successful or they get that chip on their shoulder. And I liked what you said there, chip on the shoulder, chips in the pocket. I thought that was clever. So getting back to what Mark had said, and Mert, was around how important it is in the early stage. And that was actually one of my questions coming into this, right? That some of the decisions that you make at the beginning of the company, how does that affect the exit? It's a question that every entrepreneur, especially if there's first time founder, you've got to have that exit strategy in there. Every investor is going to ask you that. And you're like, that's so far away. Why is it so important to think about the exit at the beginning and beyond just the cap table? Because you mentioned like the investor side, the co-founders, the vesting, what are some of the other things that are really important to hone in on?
Well, let me just go a little bit deeper on that for 1 second.
Perfect.
Which is, I know the market's changing right now, but in the past several years, many entrepreneurs were focusing on how much money they raised in a round, and more money was better. And the valuation, the higher the valuation was better, and a high valuation was a badge of honor. And a name brand VC was better than a smaller VC. It gave you cachet and credibility, right? Maybe. I would argue that what matters, we call it a waterfall distribution. At the end, when there's a sale, there is a waterfall distribution that says, okay, if there's X amount of money to be shared, how does it get deployed? Who gets what? The different classes of preferred shares, the common shares. And what I say to entrepreneurs is, look, don't be afraid to ask.
Absolutely.
So it goes both ways.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you're worried about where you're going to get the information, these large companies literally, they put out a letter every year
and trust. And so, yes, many transactions. Reach your earnout goals. Like there's
But it didn't matter because they got it. They knew that
the long-term relationships really matter a lot. And we don't think of life as a zero-sum game. We don't think of this as a transaction. We think of this as a moment in time. And we want to encourage all founders to find that place. We really believe in servant leadership, and to find that place where you are not just maximizing the return for yourself, but you understand the importance and the necessity, because it's a long life and you're going to be doing multiple companies, and reputation really matters a great deal. Mert, what do you think?
It's perhaps the one of the most character building moments in the journey of a startup, because the price of every move is really high. You know, fundraising is important, for example, but let's face it, I mean, have maybe like 100 fundraising meetings before you get to a yes. So, you know, if a meeting doesn't go too well and you kind of bomb a meeting and so on and so on, okay, there's another VC firm that's out there. There might be like 3-4 companies that can be really great acquirers for you. And that pressure really builds up. It builds up in your day-to-day psyche. It makes kind of hard to sleep when you're going through this. It makes your hands sweaty. I even every time we talk about, exit right and my exit, I get trepidations of thinking about my own exit. I'm like, oh man, I'm getting stressed out right now. Because while there's a reward in the end, throughout the process, it can be really, really, really high pressure. And there are a lot of opportunities sort of like squeeze maybe your people, squeeze the other side has opportunities to squeeze you. And to what end? To make incrementally more money, whatever you want to call it, resources. And if you sort of have the view of this zero-sum game, this sort of short transactional nature, then this becomes sort of this hunting ground of who screws the other person over the most. And in those moments, we really want to encourage all of our listeners here to think long-term. Imagine you're having a conversation with yourself 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Is that person you're talking to thinking about this moment fondly? Is that person looking back proud of the decisions that you've made? Are the folks that you've come all this distance with, they look back and go, man, Mert really had our back there. This is what your legacy is made out of, not the extra $1 million you made. Money comes, money goes. There's going to be plenty of companies that you end up building, and over your lifetime, hopefully ones that are even more successful than the one before. But your reputation, you only get to build it, and more importantly, you only get to lose it once. So really, really think long-term in here. Think about the headline that you would be proud of writing, and then go make that real for you.
Yeah.
Love that.
Great. So Will, thank you. This has been an incredible conversation. I've really appreciated your questions, and we're here to help. We're always glad to talk to entrepreneurs and CEOs, and anything we can do, we're always glad to give back.
Yeah. Thank you guys for sitting down. This was a lot of fun, and I can tell you've got a lot of great chemistry, and I think that was a great way to kind of wrap it up, right? Talking about how even though you pitched Mark 3 times, Mert, you kept that relationship going. You guys kept going. He was the first call in the M&A, and here you are now together working at Math Ventures. So obviously, that empathy, that relationship building, that trust building is so key. So thank you both for sitting down. This was a lot of fun. Can you please let the audience know how they can connect with you outside of this conversation?
Sure.
And get the book, of course.
exit right. So my name is Mart Achler, Achler, and I'm at mathventurepartners.com. Or reach out to me either through Math or through LinkedIn.
And my name is Mert Iseri. If you're doing the American pronunciation, it's a little difficult of a name, but I'm easy to find at MHI on Twitter, or also on LinkedIn, or just go to our website. We're reachable, we're findable. And Exit Right is in every Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever bookstore that you go get your books from. And please reach out. Our biggest motivation for writing this book was to give back. We wrote the book that we wish we read ourselves while we were going through our own exits. And boy, there's very few feelings in life that's better than hearing from a founder a genuine thank you around how we made their exit a little bit better. So please, 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 please reach out. Don't hesitate. And we're always here for you. We're in your corner.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
All right. Thanks, Will.
On your way out, please share the podcast with others. It's the only way that the community grows and others hear these incredible stories from entrepreneurs and top performers. And of course, pound that subscribe button so you get notified when episodes drop every Friday. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley Podcast. Have a very profitable day.
You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate. Caught in a circle saying, I'll never leave this place. Some words got you searching for the bright side over and over.